Slavery made some Americans rich, true enough.
So is this a critique of capitalism I'm seeing here? What the fuck? Folks, welcome back to YouTube's hottest and probably only political game show. Today, you're witnessing the first ever PragerU, you've got to be kidding me, in front of a live studio audience. Say hi, studio audience. There we go. That's what I like to see. I have you wrapped around my finger, chat. Anyways, the rules of this game show are simple. I've got a dartboard over here. In a moment, I'm going to throw some darts at this boardy boo, and then, live with my lovely, loyal fan base watching, I'm gonna react to whichever PragerU video that number is assigned to. For example, if I happen to land on the bullseye, today's video would happen to be, is Jesus a socialist? That is predetermined. It is not, I throw the number at the board, I do not throw the dart at the board and then decide after the fact. It is set in stone. We're leaving it up to Lady Luck today. All right, folks, now it comes time for the featured event. We good? Can we read the numbers? Yeah, that's facing the right way. Okay, folks, here we go. Shit. Jesus. Oh, number 13. See that this is real. This is happening right in front of you. Okay, number 13. What's wrong with the 1619 project? Let's just go through. I have a feeling some of the claims are going to be fraudulent on their face. So let's get to it.
Have you heard of the 1619 project? It was published by the New York Times in August of 2019. It won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 2020. Its thesis: the United States was founded in 1619 when the first slave was brought to North America. Wait, that brings up some questions. What happened to 1776?
I'll give you the really quick, simple answer that I'm surprised you didn't bother to think of. The argument being that the economic base of support that America had allowed it to have the sort of economic viability to not only be its own country, but to support itself. Like, had there been less slave labor, the agricultural sector that very quickly popped up, particularly in the South, wouldn't have been as viable, which means it wouldn't have attracted as many, I almost said pagans, pilgrims, that's the word I was looking for. If it hadn't been for this base of economic viability that was allowed through the institution of chattel slavery. It's a really simple answer there, Guy. I don't know why you didn't think of it first.
To them, everything that's wrong with America is tied to her original sin of slavery, from segregation to traffic jams.
What kind of... Hey folks, Editing Piley here. In the live recording session, I couldn't find on their list of sources anything referring to traffic jams being a result of slavery, but I found it, and it turns out that it is a thing that exists. It's just that PragerU misrepresents what it has to say. The piece in question was examining how the highway system of Atlanta, Georgia was set up to reinforce segregation at the expense of efficiencies. Like, the roads were set up janky on purpose just so that they could separate where the black people lived from the white people. So yeah, I think it's actually pretty fair to say that the road system explicitly set up to be segregation is a result of segregation. I don't think that's a hot take, actually. Anyways, back to the video.
According to the 1619 project, the founding fathers pushed for all that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness stuff to protect their slave holdings.
Hey folks, Editing Piley again. Wow, look at that. That was really quick. Here I am again. Get over it. So in the live recording session, your boy made an oopsie. I put apparently a little too much good faith into the 1619 project. I got the sense watching this PragerU video that they were overstating the 1619's claim that slavery was tied directly to the cause of the American Revolution. I had assumed that they had just said it was a part of the whole and that PragerU was blowing that up as bigger than it was. But now apparently they, in the original versions of the essays, used phrases like all of the colonists and said it was the cause, which is a claim that during the live recording session I said was pretty preposterous, and there are historians that have said it better than I could, but it sounds like give me liberty or give me death type rhetoric was really good at winning over normies, as it were. But to claim that protecting slavery was a part of every revolutionary's motivation, not just the moneyed interest of the slave-owning class, is definitely a bit of a stretch. Though I also want to add in this editing Piley insertion that there were some big court cases in Great Britain in the 20 years leading up to the revolution that, in my eyes, suggest, again, the slave-owning class could have been motivated to support or, to spread support for the revolution amongst the colonies because they wanted to protect their slaveholdings. But again, the project doesn't seem to be claiming that it was just the slave-owning class that had an interest in protecting slavery. They seemed to say that it was everybody. So not great on the 1619 project there. But anyways, let's continue.
For the 1619 Project authors, racism is not a part of the American experience. It is the American experience. Is this true?
Well, if you consider the fact that if you want to be accurate to history, on stolen land, but if you're a moderate shill and you want to mince words a little bit, we're on land that was arm heisted from native peoples under threat of big guns. Then from that fact alone, I think it's fair to say that America is built on racism, because literally the buildings we're in were built on racism.
If you asked the founders why they no longer wanted to be a British colony, they would have given you a long list of reasons.
Well, I mean, if you ask me if I'm eating healthy, I'll tell you yes, because I'm ashamed of all the junk food I shove into my body. So maybe we shouldn't just rely on the self-identification of the founding fathers who owned slaves.
Yes, the subject of slavery was hotly debated at the Constitutional Convention, but that was after the war was won.
That doesn't mean it wasn't on anybody's mind during the war. That's a really weird way to put that.
2. Slavery made America rich.
That's just objectively true. When you have an agricultural base allowed to you, the wealth creation that is available when you work people to the bone and don't have to pay them is infinitely better for the slave-owning class than had there not been slavery. Like if we had modern workers' rights back then, we would have produced much less food, and that would have meant much less money. And it's not just food, it's, also cotton, which in turn would have made America less rich. So he's wrong. Let's be clear, he's wrong here, but let's keep going.
Slavery made some Americans rich, true enough.
So is this a critique of capitalism I'm seeing here? What the fuck? Is he literally about to say that the wealth wasn't distributed properly? Jesus Christ. Because yeah, it doesn't matter where the hands were going, it did impact the country as a whole. Again, access to food, buildings being built by slaves helps make America richer, even if it, was funneled into the pockets of a few people.
Eli Yale, for example, made a fortune in the slave trade. He donated money and land for the university that is named after him. But the institution of slavery didn't make America rich.
Yes, it did. That's
in
all I have
fact,
to
the
say
slave
to that.
system badly slowed the economic development of half the country. As economist Thomas Sowell points out, in 1860, just 1 year before the Civil War began, the South had only 1/6 as many factories as the North. Almost 90% of the country's skilled, well-paid laborers and professionals were based in the North. Banking, railroads, manufacturing, all were concentrated in the North.
It's breaking my brain how dumb this argument is. Like, yeah, if I took my home state of Washington and compared it to, like, Texas, and then found the couple of industries where Washington state is better, and I'm like, ooh, look, we've got more economic activity in building planes. Clearly our model is the more economically freeing one. That's just such a weird argument to make. And yeah, it's true that the North was catching on to workers' rights quicker and had, was industrializing earlier. But I don't think that's an argument against it being economically productive. I just think it's kind of a weird compounding factor of where their priorities were. Like, you kind of needed, for some of these jobs, more literacy. So if you're forcing this population to be illiterate for so many centuries, yeah, they're not going to be able to work within these kind of industrialized systems as well. But saying that slavery was bad or inefficient isn't saying that it didn't bring wealth to this country. That's not disproving the claim. And you know what? Thank you, earphone guy. That is a great point. Where did they think the North got the resources to be economically profitable from? Which is absolutely true. New York did not have slaves. They abolished them pretty soon. But there were a lot of New York City folk who were benefiting from handling the business expenses of slave trading, aside from the cotton being harvested in the South that got sent up to the North that allowed for economic productivity.
And the cost of abolishing slavery was enormous.
It didn't have to be enormous if we didn't pay these people for their slaves. If we just said, fuck you, they're free, asshole, it would have cost a lot less money. But we sucked, so we bought slaves off of them. Because even though, in a very important sense, and this is another topic for another video, the abolition of slavery is an indictment of private property rights, we didn't go all the way because we did pay them for their slaves.
Not merely in terms of dollars. Lincoln borrowed billions to pay for it. But also in terms of human life. 360,000 Union soldiers died in order to free 4 million slaves. That works out to about 1 soldier in blue for every 10 slaves freed. It's hard to look at that butcher's bill and conclude that the nation turned a profit from slavery.
What the fuck kind of argument am I looking at? Yes, some people died to fight it. That doesn't mean, again, that we didn't economically benefit. Jesus fucking Christ, this is so baby-brained. Again, the economic viability afforded a brand new nation at its foundation kind of supersedes the fact that some people died to abolish it. And it's also important to note here, he says 360,000 Union lives were lost, with approximately 10% of the Union Army being black men who were, mostly former slaves. We can assume that a roughly similar population, 36,000 black men who were former slaves, died to free themselves, which I feel the need to nitpick here just because it affects the sort of this really dumb calculation he's making, so maybe I shouldn't even try to approach it in good faith. But a lot of these deaths were people fighting to free themselves.
And many things have happened since 1865. In the almost 200 years since the Civil War, the population of the country has grown almost 900%, and our national GDP has increased 12,000%.
That doesn't disprove anything because we got bigger. It's also impossible to ignore the 1,200% GDP figure here, which I don't want to bother checking. I'm just going to assume that much is correct, is influenced by offshoring slavery. For example, we got a lot of economic growth from banana republics in Latin America around the turn of the century, So this 1,200% increase in GDP is not free of shittiness. That's a weird way to put it. But I say all that to say it's not like we've been a perfect, just economy since the Civil War. It is still, and even today, to a much lesser extent, but I feel there are a few people out there who would reject the idea that paying immigrants less money than they're legally supposed to be getting is a form of exploitation that does benefit the wealth of this country. Like, we probably wouldn't have quite as many fruit crops, or at least specific kinds of crops, if we had to pay people more. Hey folks, Editing Piley again. Damn, I sure am popping up a lot in this video, huh? I'm honestly beating myself up over even needing to add this section. The fact that I didn't think of it in the live recording session brings me a level of shame I haven't felt in years. But it's impossible to talk about America and slave labor without discussing one of the clauses of the 13th Amendment that says the conditions of slavery are fine if somebody's in prison, which in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War meant that some prisoners were sold off to private companies to do slave labor. They were slave labor contracts that the prisons would rent these people out for, and that was legal because of this clause in the 13th Amendment. And this precedent carries over into today, where prison labor, despite getting marginally compensated, is protected through this clause. Like the legal challenges to working conditions and all that are protected by this clause. Pretty important thing to bring up. Again, really pissed I didn't think of it before, but c'est la vie. Anyways, back to the video. Whatever, we already said he was wrong.
Racism is an unchangeable part of America. This argument is more philosophical than scholarly, but it undergirds the entire 1619 project.
What?
It's also pernicious because it suggests that the United States is an inherently racist country that can't overcome its flaws.
Does it suggest that, or is that what your think tanks came up with as a good way to talk, a good talking point to talk against this? Talk.
Today, America is the most successful multiracial country in history, the only white majority country to elect a black president twice. Of course, progress has not always been smooth. There have been terrible setbacks. American attitudes about race today to America 100 years ago, let alone to 1619, is absurd.
This graph right here, as dumb as it is super telling. Would you like to tell me, Mr. Host, whose name I haven't remembered, was it the 1920s a neutral race time? Were we kind of fair to people of color during that time, huh? Was that kind of a balanced, moderate middle ground on our race relations? Short answer, no. We had segregation of all types of people, even including, and I'm surprised he doesn't bring it up here, because this kind of undercuts his arguments, or a conservative argument about white people being prejudiced against. The 1920s was when Italians, Irish people, and Jewish folks were seeing super bad oppression as well. So would you like to tell me that the 1920s was a middling time when it came to Italians or Irish people? I'd like to see you try.
2 million black Africans have come to America as legal immigrants from countries like Nigeria in the last 50 years.
And when they run for office, they get fucking demonized to hell and back because they're un-American and, I'm referring specifically to Ilhan Omar here. She came from Africa, right? Somalia, yeah. So 2 million of them will come over here, and I'm sure he goes on to say they're a very productive minority group. Just don't run for office, or you'll get demonized by every leg of the conservative media outlet
and have become one of the most successful groups in the country. Why would these folks move to what is often called an evil, racist country?
Because money makes the world go round, dumbass. Why do immigrants come to a country that so clearly dislikes immigrants? Because the sanctions and crime and shitty conditions of their home country mean that going to America, where there's at least a little bit of promise of money, means they've at least got a better shot than getting wrapped up in, gang activity in their home country. Oh yeah, and fleeing war. Why would you come to a country that's supposedly racist? Because there's a war going on in my home.
It's also only fair to note that while blacks have heroically fought for our rights, often against great odds, we haven't done it alone. A vast number of decent whites have also advanced the cause of racial equality.
Yes, we got there. We did it, everyone. We got to the give white people credit for civil rights portion of the video. I was starting to break out a sweat. I was worried they wouldn't get around to this point in the video, but thank God they found the time to put it in. And my issue here isn't even to say that he's wrong. Obviously there were, on a local level or on a federal level, white people involved that did help the cause of civil rights. There was plenty of activism, especially between similarly oppressed groups. There were coalitions of white Jewish people and black people fighting for their rights. My response here is more to say that it's really chauvinistic, if you will, to take a group of people who, again, fought tooth and nail for their very basic rights, to turn around and try to give credit to the gracious powers that be that let it happen. To focus on them is to ignore the super smart and super long campaigns of, the obvious, like the Martin Luther Kings of the world. And more importantly, that kind of plays defense for the larger issue that it was a self-interested white majority that got in the way of civil rights.
To cite one of countless examples, the U.S. Senate that passed the landmark Civil Rights Act in 1964 contained 98 whites and 2 men of color.
Well, gee, I wonder why there were no black senators that could have been involved with passing the Civil Rights Act. It's almost like there were institutional barriers to keeping people of color from being senators. Like, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, obviously in a country that kept black people from electing people that looked like them into the Senate. Of course, those people weren't going to be in the Senate.
The great black leaders of the past, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, never lost faith in America's promise that all people are created equal. None of them believed that racism was America's defining characteristic.
Well, I don't know if it's that they didn't believe that that was, leading up to their time, a defining characteristic. And I'm sure a lot of their belief came through their knowledge that their people would continue to fight, no matter how hard it got. Not that there was necessarily, slave owners wrote all men are created equal on a piece of paper. That's what keeps me going. Now, I'm sure it was just that they felt within their communities that they would push going forward.
Shortly after the 1619 Project was published, a group of distinguished historians, almost all on the left, wrote a public letter condemning the work.
Hey folks, one final editing Piley insertion here to round out the video. I love how he's trying to both appeal to authority and to bipartisanship here, while at the same time completely sidelining the fact that the historians he's talking about have vastly different issues with the 1619 Project than he does. Like the leftist historians in question, for example, take issue with its narrow focus on American slavery rather than the larger history of Atlantic slave trade, or believe that the 1619 Project kind of does away with the concept of class on its own and rather tries to posit it as a side effect to slavery, which in turn kind of creates a US history that does away with or ignores to some extent the class struggle unrelated to, African slaves. None of which are critiques this guy agrees with in the slightest. They in fact contradict a lot of what he has to say in this video. But I'm sure he's banking on his audience not reading what these evil communist lefties have to say, so he's just kind of using this vague appeal to try to support his argument, even though these historians couldn't disagree with him more.
I'm Wilfred Riley, Associate Professor of Political Science at Kentucky State University for Prager University.
But yeah, in conclusion, I guess I was wrong. I didn't really need to have read the 1619 Project going into this. It was pretty objectively just kind of off base from the jump. So good for me. I guess I'm a little smart cake over here. But anyways, I think I've said my piece. Let's send it on over to the pre-recorded outro, because I don't want to say all those things again. Be sure to toss me a like and subscribe down below. But if you really want to help me out, you can join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, like early versions of every video, and exclusive Patreon-only videos. Plus, if you join the Piley Benton's Biggest Boys tier, you get your name read off at the end of every video, which I am about to do once I pull up the names. Zoth, Sean Locke, Revo Pregame, Emily, Nillik Elites, Floof Pants, and Cameron Fordo. So if you want to hear your lovely name read off at the end of every video, be sure to join me on this specific tier. Thanks much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.